I regret that I cannot be present today for medical reasons, but I send all of you my greetings and heartfelt thanks for this honor. A short while ago, I was asked by Professors Ernest Abadal and Ricardo Guerrero that I should prepare a brief comment for this occasion. I assumed that it would be relevant to discuss the evolution of the Science Citation Index into the Web of Science and its relation to Google Scholar. As regards Google, I refer you to the blog by the American librarian Eric Rumsey, in which he referred to me as the grandfather of Google. About 50 years ago, the Institute for Scientific Information, more commonly known as ISI, began to publish current contents in a series called This Week's Citation Classic. Over a 15-year period, we asked thousands of authors to write commentaries on these highly cited papers, which are now available on the web. You can find this at www.citationclassics.org. So I was surprised to be asked later by the editor of an international journal to do the same for my 1955 now classic paper published in Science. As a confirmed citationist, I pointed out this paper was not my most cited, but rather my 1972 paper in Science on using citation analysis to evaluate journals, which attracted much more attention. The latter paper has had great importance for Thomson Reuters in its work in building and maintaining the content of the Web of Science, and as a guide to publishers in developing more useful scholarly journals. Nonetheless, I consider my 1955 paper far more significant. In fact, it's primordial. In that sense, I am like many other authors who feel that their most cited work is not necessarily their best. My most cited work is, in fact, my book published in 1979 entitled Citation Indexing. Tracing the genealogy of citations to my primordial paper reveals the evolution of the concept of citation indexing from a system for information retrieval to a tool for research evaluation. In a much later paper that I published in 1995, I suggested that the tail was now wagging the dog. In the first few decades after the appearance of the 1955 paper and its 1964 successor, most of the citing papers concern the pros and cons of citation indexing for information retrieval. In those days, there was a preoccupation with controlled vocabulary-based indexing. So we created the Permuterm Subject Index as a natural language supplement to the Citation Index section of the SCI. Much later, Henry Small, my longtime colleague, would formalize the role of citations as concept symbols. An early portent of the use of the SCI for evaluating science was a 1965 paper by the Australian researcher Margolis. By that time, Irving Scher and I had already done the simplistic exercise of sorting the primordial SCI to produce a list of the 50 most cited authors. About 1/3 of these authors proved to be Nobel Prize winners, and almost all were authors that we described as of Nobel class. When the 1955 paper was published, there were few computers. Punch card methods were considered revolutionary at that time. Even 10 years later, when we launched the printed SCI, punch cards were used as data input to the first primitive IBM computers to produce the first printed SCI. In those days, Vannevar Bush's concept of memex was as close as we came to thinking about the idea of an internet. But the linking properties of citations were fully recognized and given formal descriptions by Ralph Garner, who was then at Drexel, and Derek de Soto Price, who was then at Yale. The idea of mapping based on the linking properties of citations was well understood and used to explore the historiography of DNA as a good example. Early on, a small group of people saw in the SCI its significant potential for bibliometric evaluations. Various authors have identified the significant papers and reports that have eventually made the SCI a standard tool in the hands of science policy analysts and others interested in evaluation, including those who like to play parlor games predicting Nobel Prizes. However, the SCI is now not only considered in predicting Nobel Prizes, it is considered essential in libraries and elsewhere, but also sufficiently popular to engender competition from Elsevier, the world's largest journal publisher, as well as Google Scholar. Both have creatively reapplied citation linking. Indeed, Google's technological success as a search engine is based on its citation ranking process. Reading the 1955 paper once again reminded me of the inspiration that the concept had from my early interest in encyclopedism. In 1970, Manfred Kochen commented on its role in the worldwide encyclopedic movement. Today, the internet has enabled the development of Wikipedia and other grand schemes that will make the H.G. Wells' dream of a world brain a reality. The relatively low memory capacity of computers in the early days would prevent us and their application for these uses for more than 3 decades. Since then, the network properties of citation indexes have been explored by numerous investigators. These were pioneered by Derek de Soto Price in his 1965 Networks paper. It appeared shortly after my 1964 paper in Science, which described the SCI as a new dimension in scientific evaluation. It is easy to forget today that even after a decade since the first printed SCI annual was published, libraries hotly debated whether to purchase it to supplement or even replace a combination of traditional indexing services for biology and chemistry. Eventually, the basic conservatism of scientists and librarians was overcome. This evolution paralleled the growth in computer memory capacity from the 16K memory of the IBM 1401 computer we used in those days to the terabyte capacity we take for granted today. I remember well when I first came to Spain over 50 years ago, we had to modify our ASCII software to work with the 12K memory of the 1401 at the Ministry of Education. Today, the SCI in its latest form is part of the Web of Science and a network of over 1 billion citations, and is now routinely used in academia and industry for discovery and research impact assessment. While this is a fine legacy for a small index introduced many years ago, one of my greatest disappointments has been the failure of many scholars to use it as a tool for selective dissemination of information. Today, SDI is performed by weekly or daily alerts, but the first such service, the automatic subject citation alert, was started in 1965, just a year after we started the SCI. It is still not a routine practice for many users and scholars to be citation conscious. Every student should be taught this process and to ask by whom and where his or her work has been cited. Closing, I want to thank the University of Barcelona for this unique honor. Thank you very much. Good night.